but she was actually executed for wearing men's clothing. That was really the final thing that they you know, what's really funny is that they told her she probably would not have had been executed if she would have stopped doing that, but she wouldn't stop doing that. And so, anyway, I wanted to create, you know, that teenager. How would God talk to her? He would have to be way more aggressive. He would actually have to appear in human form and then try to get her attention in a world where we are actually very, very divorced from ideas of religion, regardless of how much people say they practice it. It's interesting to me that 70%, something like that, of people in this country say that they practice or identify with practicing a religion. There's more religion practiced in this country than any country in the world, and you know, compared to places like Britain's, it's about 44% of people say they identify with practicing a religion, and I think France is lower than that. Now, that's just somebody responding to a poll, of course, and my theory is that people always say what they think they're supposed to say in polls, and that's why they're so misleading. So you live in a country that was founded on a religious principle, by the way, not religious freedom, as we're often told, but the Puritans were coming here looking for more rules than they had in England. So you're living in a country that's founded on that principle. It's founded on the Protestant work ethic, and it identifies with religion, and so there's a kind of social moray that goes on where you're not supposed to admit to not practicing religion in this country. So I think people sort of answer a little more positively than they might, as opposed to in England, which is a country that prides itself on intellectualism and common sense, and it makes sense that they would sort of underrepresent themselves as how many people practice religion. But the point is that when I was creating this show, I was in the position of talking all the time to journalists, and it gave me an idea of what people's understanding of religion is, and lack thereof. You know, we have such a generalized understanding of religion in our culture that, you know, I would be doing interviews with people like journalists from Time magazine or some big publication, and they would say, you know, blah blah blah, and you know, and so you were interested in the Joan of Arc myth, and I'd say story, and then we'd talk a little more, and he'd go Joan of Arc myth, and I'd say story, and then the third time I said, look, I don't care what you think she was doing, if you think she was crazy or what. But, and it doesn't bother me you don't know that much about religion, but you should know a little something about history. You know, the 100 Years' War it's important, and it happened, and it's documented, and you know, and I was always sort of getting into these discussions with people who were intellectuals. I mean, these were writers for major publications. I had one say to me, "Well, you're Catholic, so you guys are polytheists." And I said, not only is that not true, it's insulting, you know, and this guy has no concept of having insulted me, and, you know, and I had that conversation, the monotheism conversation over and over again. So, so you're in show God, God shows up in different forms, so there's more than one God. No, we're going with monotheism. It's worked for a while now. And so it became a little disturbing that I had done so much research to represent this theological idea in the world, and because I really felt a responsibility that I'm coming in and I'm creating, any show that I do that. I'm creating this mythology. I had better know it down to the ground. I better have all the answers to it, and I created a 10 commandments of the show, of what, you know, God could and couldn't do. You know, God couldn't directly intervene. Joan was allowed to say no to God. God doesn't actually get involved in fixed problems, and I had all these rules for myself. And, you know, it just led to a really deep study of religious principles, various, you know, world religions, because I wanted to know what I was talking about. God could never actually identify a proper religion in my world, and so there have been a lot of copycat shows since then. There were a spate of religious or spiritual shows, and sometimes they've sort of delved into those principles, and sometimes they haven't. But one of the issues, what I wanted to do with Joan of Arcadia, and I can't believe I did not bring the actual show I wanted to show you, but I think we can still come up with the idea. I wanted to talk about the subject of evil, because I spent 1 year, or almost 2 full years, introducing Joan to the idea of God as a concept, because Joan has had no religious teaching. She has had no experience of teaching, and God is something that mainly people don't think about that much about if they don't have to. So anyway, so God spent 2 years sort of giving her the understanding of her relationship to him, you know, and how those laws of physics and metaphysics worked, and whether or not she was accountable to him. She had free will, and all these kinds of ideas that, if you have even a basic understanding of religion, you've heard of, but she didn't. And so after we established her relationship to him just as a benign entity, as a sort of caring entity, one-on-one personal relationship with her, and the principles being that he is very much concerned with her well-being, that God is on her side. So we had to negate the ideas that God is somehow a concept that you're warring with. And the other is that God had a couple of things he wanted Joan to understand. He wanted her to see the interconnectedness of all things, so he wanted her to see the consequences of her actions. And it's a very important principle that you know, the universe really doesn't work without making that connection, and we're a little disconnected from that idea. And the other is that everybody's here to fulfill their true nature. And so she, you know, and what does that mean? You know, that's, and to sort of supplant any other authority with that idea, that you're not here to behave, you're not here to do what the church wants you to do, you're not here to do what your parents want you to do, you're here to fulfill your true nature, and that's your job, is getting to know what that is and serving it. And so that was basically the principle of her relationship with him. And then finally, when she starts to trust that, and there are a couple of times when she starts to doubt it, but once she starts to trust it, then in the last episode of the second season, we presented the idea of evil. And it's such a complicated concept that you know, it was going to take another full season to even deal with it, but we got canceled. So that's what they thought of evil. One of the reasons that I want to talk about it, there are a couple of questions, and then maybe we can talk about this when it's over, which is, the first thing is, you know, just the concept of evil, whether or not it exists, and does it have any meaning in a secular world? You know, in a world where we aren't going to defer to an authority, a God, is there such thing as evil? If there is such thing as evil, and we're going to go with that because my show is about God, what does it look like? You know, why is it such a confusing concept, and why is it so hard to recognize? One of the things that I'm interested in talking about this subject, one of the reasons is that it seems to me 4 of the 5 movies that are nominated for the Oscar are about that. And I find it really fascinating that, you know, No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, Michael Clayton, those films are all about the different disguises of evil in a way, and our response to it. Like, what is our obligation to fight it, to make it accountable to itself, recognizing it, just calling it what it is, and why now? Why is that at the forefront of people's discussions? What is it about the zeitgeist right now that is making people want to talk about it? I have my opinions, and we can talk later. And I think that one of the things, you know, there are rules of depicting evil in storytelling, and we can talk about that, but, and you know, sort of just classic ideas of evil and its behavior, but also it's just interesting to talk about it in the ways that we have trouble recognizing it, not the usual ways, you know. And so toward that end, I'm going to find an episode that might be pertinent.